The Alpenföhn Black Ridge is a CPU cooler designed with a single purpose in mind, delivering a good performance while having the best clearance possible for an ITX gaming system. However, there is a catch with this cooler, a rather interesting one. You see, the Alpenföhn Black Ridge was developed with the help of the creator of the Dan SFX cases, which means one thing, that this cooler will refuse to play nice with anything that isn't an ATX motherboard and very small RAM modules. You don't believe me? Look at this. This is the only CPU cooler I have ever reviewed that not only interferes with the RAM slot, but also takes up the first expansion slot on a full ATX motherboard, forcing me to move the graphics card lower and also removing one stick of RAM. So when I say that you need to know for sure that this cooler is compatible with both your motherboard and your RAM, well, I sort of really mean it. This is not a bad thing, it is just a small inconvenience for getting this level of performance in a small package because the Dan SFX type cases are very small and not many coolers will fit. Anyway, now that we're clear on that part of the cooler, we can move on with the design of this Black Ridge, which is very good, with a dark color applied on all components of the cooler minus the backplate and the fan. The cooler uses a total of 6 copper-made heat pipes, each with an outer diameter of 6 mm. These are arranged in a C shape and are soldered directly to the base plate. Thankfully, the endings of the heat pipes are machined symmetrical and are part of the overall design of the cooler. The heat pipes also make contact with the aluminum-made fins that are part of the heatsink, and one thing to note here is the high fin density of the heatsink. It is made this way for increasing the heat dissipation area while not increasing the overall footprint of the cooler, basically maximizing the space available. The base of the cooler is made from nickel-plated copper and its surface is smooth, so smooth in fact that it reflects everything just like a mirror. Not an uncommon feature, but it is welcome to see. The active cooling is done by a single 92 mm fan, which is also slim, with a thickness of just 15 mm. This fan is made by Alpenföhn and has a minimum speed of 800 rpm and a maximum speed of 2800 rpm. It also uses a single 4-pin connector for power with an all-black cable that is unfortunately not sleeved. One important feature of the Black Ridge cooler is that it can be used in different modes for different purposes. You can install a regular 120 mm fan at the top of the heatsink for optimal cooling, and by the way, Alpenföhn calls this the overclocking mode, or you can use a slim 120 mm fan on the underside of the heatsink, if you have room, that is. Installing this cooler is fairly easy. You select the correct brackets for your platform and attach them to the side of the base plate of the cooler using 2 small screws. Then you place the cooler over the CPU and attach the last 4 screws at the back of the motherboard. The installation process is simple and easy. However, a backplate would have been better and made the whole thing a lot less of a hassle, as you need to hold the cooler in place over the CPU while you try to attach the last 4 screws with just one hand. In terms of accessories and packaging, things are looking good. First of all, the cooler is protected by high quality foam around all sides, while the accessories are already available. Speaking of which, you get a pair of brackets for each platform, so 2 for Intel and 2 for AMD. Then you have 2 sets of 4 screws. The small screws are used for installing the brackets on the heatsink, and the other set is for attaching the cooler at the back of the motherboard. Finally, you also have a small tube of thermal compound and 2 sets of metallic clips alongside a user manual. From the factory, the Black Ridge uses a push configuration for the included fan, which means that the air is pushed through the heatsink from the bottom. How good this is when every other cooler is using a pull configuration is pretty debatable, and in the interest of fairness, I will be using a separate 120 mm fan also in a push configuration to help out that small 92 mm fan get more air moving away from the CPU socket area. Before we get into the testing of the cooler, here is a noise sample of the Black Ridge. This gives you an idea of how it sounds like with the included fan spinning at its maximum speed of 2800 rpm. The noise generated by the cooler with the factory fan installed and running at its maximum speed of 2800 rpm is 47 decibels, with the measuring device placed at a distance of 10 cm away from the system and CPU cooler. This 47 decibel value is not surprising to say the least, because you have a small fan trying to move as much air as possible through a heatsink in a very tight space. so it will run at 2800 RPM just to be able to do that, resulting in this noise. Testing this cooler is pretty straightforward. The used CPU is the Intel i9 9900K running at its factory settings and then overclocked manually to 5 GHz on all cores. Well, in some cases, as some coolers can handle the overclocking, but more on that later on. The first test involves the Intel Burn-Test V2 benchmark. This software applies a CPU load that is similar with what you can get in a modern video game or video rendering. And in this test, the Alpenföhn Black Ridge reached a maximum temperature of 90 degrees Celsius with an ambient temperature of 26 degrees Celsius. This was done with a factory fan installed in the factory orientation. The second test uses the AIDA 64 Extreme Stability Test benchmark, which creates an unrealistically high CPU load. This type of load will not be encountered in any scenario in your daily life, games or even video rendering. The purpose of this test is to just push its CPU cooler to its very limit and see the cooling potential. And in this test, our cooler reached a maximum temperature of 98 degrees Celsius with the factory fan installed. I was also talking about those alternative modes that you can have with this cooler, and to get as much performance as I could, I decided to install an additional 120mm fan above the heatsink. The fan in question is a noise blocker eLoop B12PS, spinning at a maximum of 1500 RPM. The fan is installed with the same orientation as the factory fan, which by the way is also left installed, so you have a push-pull configuration. And with the second fan installed, the temperature dropped by 3 degrees Celsius, resulting in a maximum temperature of 87 degrees Celsius, pushing the Alpenföhn Black Ridge above the Noctua NH-L12S in our graphs, so quite a big improvement. The Alpenföhn Black Ridge is certainly an interesting CPU cooler that has a good performance, but as all small CPU coolers, it has a limit of how much heat it can dissipate. This means one simple thing, that you will not overclock an Intel i9 9900K CPU with this cooler. It is not a question of build quality or the number of fans or how fast they spin. You simply need more cooling surface area for CPUs that can easily go above 150 watts of TDP when overclocked. Now that we agreed on that subject, we can talk about the Black Ridge cooler. And it is a good CPU cooler with a great build quality, however it is not for everyone, as it has plenty of limitations thanks to its peculiar shape and mounting system. It is pretty clear that having the creator of the DAN cases be involved in the development of this cooler means that this cooler in particular will behave and fit best inside a small ITX system housed in a DAN SFX case. Would I recommend this cooler, however? Well, yes. It does a good job, especially for its size and that small fan. However, if you want to use it, you need to do your homework, as you need to have a motherboard that is compatible with a heatsink. So you need a motherboard with smaller VR heatsinks, and you will absolutely need a riser cable for your graphics card. A thing, however, which is popular to do in the small form factor system community. If you liked this review, then you can perhaps consider subscribing for more. And also, if you want to support the channel directly, in the description below you will find the links for the Patreon and subscriber star pages.